During the 2010s, India came closer to putting a man in the NBA than ever before when Satnam Singh was drafted in the second round in 2015. And though he came up short of reaching that ultimate goal, Satnam still had a one-of-a-kind career that makes for a compelling story. If you want to hear all about it, then please check out my video on the topic, link in the description below. But Satnam was just the first step of many for the South Asian nation in developing elite basketball talent. They have been making steps in the right direction in the sport for the past couple of decades as its popularity has risen within its borders and more opportunities have been created for Indian youth to play. Shortly after Satnam, a new prodigy developed who Indians could latch onto, but things once again appear to have gone awry, leaving his career currently at a standstill. Today I want to take a look at the basketball career of Princepal Singh, both the highs and lows, breaking down his game, theorizing on what the next step may be, and figuring out if the NBA is still an attainable goal. Before we get started though, please do me a big favor and like the video as it helps me out in the algorithm far more than I think you guys realize, and subscribe for more international basketball and NBA related content. Now, let us get started. Princepal was born in 2001 in Punjab, India, and spent his youth competing in foot races and playing volleyball, which he especially enjoyed and excelled at. At the age of 14, he traveled to the major city of Ludhiana to try out for a position in their prestigious sports academy for the sport of volleyball. But while there, the 6'6" teenager was noticed by their basketball coaches who encouraged him to turn his focus to the hardwood. Obviously overjoyed by the offer of a scholarship to the institution which could open many doors, Princepal agreed and within a few weeks went from never touching a basketball in his life to devoting all his time and focus to it. After a year had passed, Princepal had grown taller and was making a good deal of progress as a basketball player. Spire Institute, a private academy in the United States that heavily focuses on young athletes' development in sports, took notice and offered him a full-ride scholarship to move stateside to continue his development on American soil. This was very similar to what had happened to Satnam Singh, who, like I said earlier, went on to hear his name called on NBA draft night. For Princepal, this offer was too good to pass up on, but unfortunately the United States, for reasons beyond my pay grade, denied his visa on two separate occasions, meaning he would have to remain in India. Come 2017, the now 16-year-old Princepal, who let me remind you had only been playing basketball for a couple of years up to this point, would get his first opportunity with the junior national team at the U16 South Asian Basketball Tournament. This being the qualification round for the eventual actual U16 Asia Cup. Here, he and his team dominated the opposition. Princepal was used as the team's center thanks to his massive height advantage, and he feasted on bunnies around the basket all tournament long. It was not the prettiest form of basketball, but it was extremely effective. India easily claimed the gold medal in the match against Bhutan, winning 131-50. Princepal led the tournament in scoring at 20 a game, although you can tell from the footage he easily could have poured on a lot more had he been needed to play more. After the tournament, seeing that his American dreams were not coming to fruition and realizing there was a cap to what he could learn in India, Princepal accepted an offer and moved to Canberra, Australia in late 2017 to join the NBA Global Academy. This being a private sports program run by the NBA itself with the purpose of developing Asian and Oceanic-born basketball talent, especially from nations with less opportunities in the sport. During this time, Princepal made great strides in the development of his game leading up to the 2018 U16 Asia Cup, where he and his teammates, who let me remind you had mostly been developing exclusively in India, would face the stiffest competition of their careers. And unfortunately, they were overwhelmed. The Indians would lose 3 straight matches to South Korea, Japan, and Lebanon, with the only close game being the final one. Princepal, now 6'10", being the biggest body on the court in any of these matches, spent all of his time as the center, but did show flashes of ball handling, and he at least took a few shots further away from the basket. Though he was far from perfect, as his rotations were very slow and it led to the opposition scoring at will inside, he only managed to average 1 block per game. Plus his passing was very poor as he averaged 7 turnovers a game. Still though, he was by far the best option India had. Princepal finished the event averaging 22 points and 13 rebounds a game while shooting 59% from 2. His play was so impressive here that only a couple months later, he would be invited to not only compete with, but also captain the older Indian national team at the U18 Asia Cup. Here, he and India fought hard, but ultimately came up short in the group stage, going 1-2 overall. Highlighted by a big-time 41-point blowout victory over Syria, though, in their final game. Princepal showed more of the same from the previous tournament, playing as the 5, though this time surrounded by larger bodies, it made him less effective overall as he shot only 48% from 2. And though he averaged impressive totals of 15 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 blocks per game, it was clear to everyone watching that his future would not be playing the 5 at the professional level. Princepal simply was not quite big enough for that role. But on the bright side, he did have great size to be a forward at 6'10", although he was not gifted in the quickness or vertical leaping department. This meant going forward he would need to further develop his perimeter skills. Things like shooting, ball handling, and passing. Plus he needed to become more athletic. Even in these Asian age group matches, Princepal appeared painfully average athletically on the floor. After these major tournaments and having spent over a year training and competing in age group club matches mostly across Australia, in 2019, Princepal, now 18 years old, was named to the BA Center of Excellence Sports Institute team, set to compete in the inaugural NBL 1 season, which would serve as the Australian NBL's official minor league, meaning he was officially playing semi-professional basketball against grown men vying for real basketball careers. This would be the toughest competition of his young career, and unfortunately he failed to make a noteworthy impact. Though statistics are not available anywhere online, there does exist plenty of game footage. On offense, Princepal was one-dimensional. He did not have good hands or rebound well. And when he did have the ball, his moves failed to create much space at all. And defensively, he was little more than a body in the way, and even with that, he often chased blocks. He had no shot at getting, which led to easy points for the opposition due to him giving up his positioning. He scored here and there, but all in all, he was not up to par with the competition in the land down under. BOE had a rough year, going 8-12 overall and missing out on the playoffs. After the NBL 1 season wrapped up in later 2019, Princepal decided to go back to India to compete with the Punjab State U18 club in the Junior National Basketball Championships, which was a tournament played outside, by the way, which I thought was pretty cool. Here he dominated the Indian competition, scoring 40 points as they won their championship match. A few months later, after spending more time training in Australia, he returned to India again for the U21 India Games, where again he led Punjab to another national title. In February 2020, Princepal was invited to compete with the Indian senior national team during their 2 qualification games for the upcoming Asia Cup. I've brought this up several times before on this channel, but around 2020, FIBA decided to scrap the sub-zone qualification tournament system they had been using for decades in favor of a 1 to 2 year long round-robin format, which is apparently more similar to how soccer does it. Of course, what this means is that the very best professionals and college athletes are now unable to represent their national teams for crucial qualification games, since most of these matches are during the actual basketball season. But I guess FIBA didn't really think about that. For Princepal, though, it sort of worked out in his favor since he was not a part of any pro club team, meaning he was available to play. Between these 2 matches, he only played 15 total minutes off the bench, but he showed high effort, especially with contesting shots at the rim. But he was still making mental mistakes defensively and was virtually a 0 impact on offense. India would split the 2 games, losing to Bahrain but defeating Iraq. Shortly thereafter, the pandemic started, and among many other things, it had a profound negative impact on basketball around the globe. But even despite this, in July, the NBA G League offered the opportunity of a lifetime to Princepal as he became the first ever Indian-born NBA Global Academy graduate to earn a 1-year contract. He would sign on to compete in the eventually shortened 2021 G League Hub season with the newly introduced G League Ignite team. This being a squad primarily made up of young basketball players who were choosing to forego either the typical college path or trying their hand in a real pro league somewhere else. The goal of the Ignite team was to develop NBA players. But before this, in November, Princepal would return to the India national team for the next 2 qualification matches, and this time he played a significantly greater role as he was moved into the starting lineup. Unfortunately, these games did not go well. Princepal was outplayed on both ends, offering little resistance to the opposition. In their 55-point blowout loss to Lebanon, he scored a career-high 8 points and grabbed 8 rebounds, but most of it came in the second half when the game was already well gone. In their second match against Bahrain, though they kept it more respectable, only losing by 16, Princepal himself only managed 6-6. But even with these frustrating outcomes, the future was still full of opportunity as he returned to the United States to prepare for the G League bubble campaign. One detail I want to bring up that does not get talked about very often is that, in my opinion, the NBA did an awful job with the scheduling of their G League COVID season. Due to the pandemic, players were being tested for COVID constantly, and a positive test would result in up to 2 weeks of isolation before a return to the court could be made. The NBA decided that their entire G League bubble season would take place for a single month running from early February to early March. And of course, FIBA in all their wisdom had already decided to schedule 2 qualification matches smack dab right in the middle of February. This meant that Princepal, alongside his teammate the Filipino Kai Soto, were put in an uncomfortable position where they had to either reject their national team opportunity, which for non-Americans has always been a very difficult ask that could lead to not being invited again in the future. See Jordan Clarkson, for example. Or they had to abandon what could be their only shot at a G League opportunity early on and cross their fingers that COVID doesn't force them to miss the entire bubble. Princepal chose the G League, Kai chose his national team. On February 17, 2021, Princepal made his professional debut against the Birmingham Squadron, receiving 7 minutes of garbage time in a blowout. He grabbed a couple rebounds but missed his only field goal attempt. A week and a half later, he would get a 3-minute run at the end of a game with the Salt Lake City Stars, and here he scored his first pro points, putting up 5. But his opponents pretty much let him score both baskets as the game was already decided. He appeared in 2 more garbage time games, scoring 4 more points, and then the season came to an end. In my opinion, his time with the G League was a major disappointment. Princepal was pegged to be the man who would take India to the NBA. He had articles written about him by ESPN, and plenty of advertisements for the G League Ignite put his face front and center as a marketing ploy. His addition to the team was an attempt to both boost the reputation of their underperforming global academy, as well as spark interest in their league from the obviously massive Indian fan base. To the surprise of nobody, Princepal did not hear his name called on NBA Draft Night 2021. But the Sacramento Kings decided to offer him a Summer League roster spot after all. Of course, the owner of the Kings franchise is Vivek Ranadive, who is a proud Indian-born man himself, and he is also well known to make questionable roster decisions, so there may have been some bias going on, but nevertheless, everything from this point going forward would have to be earned. Through the first 4 matches of the Summer League, Princepal mostly watched from the bench. But in their final game against the Boston Celtics, they got hot early and ran up a massive lead in the 4th quarter. Princepal checked into the game with 4 minutes left, and after struggling to make an impact initially, on the second to last possession, he caught a pass under the basket and finished a contested layup to score his first 2 points with an NBA team, thus making him only the second ever Indian-born player to score in the NBA Summer League. Though his impact on the court was nearly non-existent, he must have impressed Ranadive enough behind the scenes because in October, the Stockton Kings, their G League affiliate, selected Princepal in the 3rd round of the G League draft. However, after only a week-long training camp, he failed to make their roster and was let go. It did not take long for the next opportunity to come though. In November, Princepal landed a 2-year contract with the New Zealand Breakers of the NBL, meaning he was headed back down to the Southern Hemisphere to continue his basketball career. But this stretch became a foggy one. After making major headlines with the signing, Princepal never appeared in a regular season game with the Breakers. And due to what he later described as personal issues without further explanation, he said he could not continue with the team and they released him in January of 2022. We can only speculate what happened here, obviously, but I have a feeling Princepal felt he was not getting enough opportunity in their scrimmages and decided that he would rather leave to compete with the Indian national team than ride the bench in New Zealand. It must have been a rough stretch for the young man, but he kept grinding. He turned his focus to the next step, which would be helping India try to qualify for the FIBA World Cup. Allow me to go on a bit of a tangent. It may sound stupid, and that's because it is, but the Asian Cup, which India had been battling for the right to compete in for the past 2 years, doesn't matter with regards to competing for the world title, like it previously had for many decades. No, that would make too much sense. Rather than inviting the best teams from each continent's major tournament to compete for the world title, especially when you consider that these tournaments take place in the summer, therefore all the best players are playing, instead, FIBA wants to completely throw out these results and instead have another series of round-robin games span 2 years to decide who gets to compete. So in February of 2022, India had 3 games to play. Then in early July, they would get back together for literally just one more, and after all this, they would then travel to the Asian Games in Indonesia in the middle of July, which, let me remind you, has zero impact on who gets to compete for the world title. Then they would resume the random games here and there in the winter that go back to mattering. It is beyond idiotic what FIBA has done, but let's get back to Princepal. These February games did not go well for either him or his national team. New Zealand was simply at a level they had never before seen. They lost their 2 matches with them by a combined 90 points. And their other game against the Philippines was not much better as they fell by 24. And even more concerning than the final score was the play of Princepal. He was completely outmatched by the opposition as they drove inside and finished at will. He was usually late to react, but even when he was there in time, the athleticism and basketball IQ of his opponents made him look silly. And he was not any better on offense as he only managed to average 3 points per game, all being garbage time bunnies. This coming right after being rejected by the NBA and G League must have been a huge blow to his confidence, and it was the start of the darkest stretch of his basketball career. Exactly whose decision it was is not clear, but when July came, Princepal was no longer a part of the Indian national team. He would not play in their round-robin match, nor was he going to the Asian Cup. Instead, he joined the newly founded adult club team India Rising, which would compete in the famous summer TBT tournament in the US. This being a squad made up of Indian former college basketball players from the US and Canada. They would get blown out by 28 in their first and only game against the Syracuse alumni team. And more concerning was that Princepal barely got any court time or made any sort of impact. After the summer came to an end, Princepal found himself at a crossroads. He was no longer a kid, but was still only 21 years old. His peers were either in college or off playing professionally elsewhere. He gave up the opportunity of college when he decided to go all in with the G League Ignite team. And he had more than just a tryout with the NBA, but it failed to materialize into anything. Then he thought he could continue his career back in Oceania, where he formerly spent so much time growing up, but for reasons unknown to us, that did not work out. And now his role with his country's national team, which he formerly was destined to be the face of, seemingly had come to an end. And then he sustained a serious back injury while weight training in October of 2022. This really could have been it for Princepal. Like Satnam before him, this would have been an ugly end. But he kept his head square on his shoulders and focused on the next task at hand. He recovered, though it took many months. Honestly, I have no idea exactly how or what he injured. I don't know if he had a surgery done. I don't know what happened. Nowhere online does any interview actually dive into the nitty-gritty with him. Most of the time he gives vague answers to tough questions and they move on. It is very frustrating to read, and honestly, it would not shock me if the back injury was just a cover-up for a mental health issue. Although I do not want to speculate too much on the topic, so let's just move on. In March 2023, Princepal announced he would be returning to the hardwood back in India with the Punjab Gladiators for the 9-day-long Indian Elite Pro Basketball League tournament. He then changed the team he would be representing to the Mumbai Stars, but ultimately he didn't even show up. Whether this was due to still recovering from his injury or something else, we unfortunately have no idea. And from there, things once again went silent. But despite everything, Princepal eventually did return to the court in February of 2024, nearly a year later than his planned ETA, and over a year and a half since his single game with India Rising. And he made this return donning the Indian national team jersey as they begun the process of trying to qualify for the upcoming 2025 FIBA Asia Cup. I wish I had something different to say about these games, but he looked extremely rusty and his athleticism was gone. His defensive rotations were slow, the opponents bullied him inside, and he failed to leave a positive mark on the floor. In his first game back through 17 minutes of action against Kazakhstan, he failed to score. But in their second match against Iran, he flew past his defender and threw down a big-time highlight dunk that got his teammates and fans off their feet. It was a bucket 2 years in the making, and you know it must have felt really, really good for him. Unfortunately, India ended up losing that game to Iran, but 9 months later, after again not appearing on the hardwood anywhere on record, in November 2024, Princepal was again a member of their national team. And though he only totaled 6 minutes of action between their 2 matches this month, he was a part of the squad that got their revenge against the Kazakhs, ending not only a 16-game losing streak for India in FIBA play, but also a 27-year-long drought against Kazakhstan. And that brings us up to today. Princepal Singh started playing the sport of basketball very late, but was a natural with how quickly he picked it up. He flew past his peers in the age group ranks, put up some impressive numbers in official international games, earned the roster spot of a lifetime with the G League Ignite team, then scored an official NBA basket, but a lack of development in his forward skills, personal reasons, and a serious back injury derailed his career right when it was really getting started. I do not think this is the end of Princepal, because India returns to FIBA action in a month for a couple more games between Iran and Qatar, so I'm actually expecting that we're going to see him there. But from that point on, I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I hope we get to see an improved Princepal Singh on that roster, and I hope they can earn qualification for this summer's Asia Cup tournament, and I hope Princepal can find a pro team somewhere, maybe in Southeast Asia, and try to get his career back on its feet. So now I ask to you guys, what do you guys think about Princepal's basketball journey up to this point? Do you think the door remains open for a return to the NBA, or maybe the better question is, where do you think he goes from here? Thank you all for watching the video. Again, please like and subscribe if you have not already. I will see you all next time.